Stay more comfortable, more concealed, and in the stand longer with Osseo gear. Premium camouflage apparel created for bow hunters by bow hunters. Osseo's revolutionary patented camo patterns and innovative features are designed to keep whitetail bow hunters totally invisible and dead quiet. Elevate your game with Osseo. Visit asiogear.com and take 20% off your purchase with code TRUTH20. Hey folks, I want to take a minute to give you a heads up about Tethered's latest gear. If you're serious about staying mobile in the woods, you've got to check this stuff out. Now, I've been using their Ultra Lock saddle, and now the SD saddle is available. And let me tell you, this thing is dialed. It's ultra light, super adjustable, and most importantly, it's comfortable. You're not going to be shifting around up in the tree wondering if your legs are going to fall asleep. Pair that with the Predator V platform, which is stable, lightweight, and has an angled front edge for comfort. This thing will give you plenty of room for those critical moments when you need to make a move on a deer. And if you're like me and you spend long hours in the tree, you'll appreciate the new Predator CFX platform. Carbon fiber construction that keeps it light, but tough enough to handle whatever you throw at it. This is the kind of gear that makes a difference when you're out there all day. And listen, if you're always juggling your gear like I am, Tethered's got you covered with the universal platform pack. More rigid to make getting your platform in and out easier, and 2 sizes to fit the smaller and larger platforms. Whether you're hunting public land or heading to your favorite spot on the back 40, this setup makes carrying your platform so much easier. So if you're serious about getting in the game this season and hunting smarter, check out Tethered at tethered.com. Their gear will keep you lighter, quieter, and up in the tree longer, which, as we all know, is where the magic happens. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 426. Today I'm joined by my buddy Dieter Kochan to talk about scrapes, strategies, and stealth. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. We are on to episode number 426. If you are headed out this weekend, we of course have the Great American Outdoor Show that's happening in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So if you're headed out to that, which I usually am there, unfortunately, I'm probably not going to make it this year. I think I mentioned in the last episode that I have some work travel that's going to take me out of the country. So probably not going to make it. But what you should be doing is visiting a few of our friends. If you are headed there, so booth 1200 and the Archery Hall, our buddies from Osseo Gear will be there. The big guy, Rendell Eric, Joe Miles will be there as well. So stop by and say hi to those guys. Check out their gear. Pester them to see what they have coming out in 2025 for the upcoming year. And then, of course, booth 1033, just taking a look at my notes real quick. 1033 is our buddies in the Archery Hall, also are our buddies from Tethered. So give them a check as well. Today I have a cool shirt for you guys. I have my buddy on, Dieter Kochan, and Dieter owns Face Off Ebikes. And so just a quick mention for him, he'll have a bike actually at the booth, the Lone Wolf Custom Gear booth in the Archery Hall as well. So I think Dieter's only going to be there for the first couple of days of the show, but the bike will be there the entirety of the show. So stop by there and check out the bike. But had Dieter on to just talk in general, just hunting. It's an interesting kind of, I always like to talk to guys who have been professional athletes in the past whenever I get the opportunity, or professionals at anything, because there's just an extra level of kind of detail, mental toughness, preparation, things like that you have to have when you perform whatever task it is at a high level. And Dieter is no exception. He was a professional hockey player in his life, and so a lot of that kind of mindset and approach to things and attention to detail carries over, of course, into his hunting, his personal life, and stuff like that. And so he really started Face Off e-bikes. He started building them for himself, and then started building them for buddies of his that were interested. And then it just kind of took off from there. And what his focus really is that what he found was as he was kind of, using e-bikes and stuff like that, was that a lot of times the ones that were being sold or hunters were picking up weren't really built to stand up to the rigors and the stress that a hunter is going to put a bike through, with like the different terrain you're going to need to go through, inclines you might need to climb, and stuff like that. And so what his focus really has been on is kind of building bikes that will last and will be built with components that can take the abuse that we're going to ultimately put them through. Truth be told, it's like I've been thinking about how an e-bike might fit into my overall hunting approach or strategy. Just given some of the places I hunt and some of the hikes that I have, and maybe sometimes those hikes limit the times I can get to them to hunt. So I've been kind of on the fence and kind of weighing my options about potentially picking up an e-bike and adding that to the arsenal. I know for me, for sure, the one thing that it does is makes it, quicker for me with a guy, family, career, podcast, limited time, of course, right? Especially, I've kind of prioritized a lot of my time during the hunting season. But in the off season, whenever I have like either scouting to do or check trail cameras or whatever the case is, that time is usually a lot more limited because it's not hunting season per se, right? So it becomes a little bit more challenging for me to kind of partition that out from other responsibilities that I have. And so if I can get to cameras more quickly, check all of them in a day, as opposed to having to split it up over the course of 2 days or 3 days or whatever the case is, that's to my benefit. And then of course, if there are places I can use it to hunt, to where maybe I have a 2-mile hike, and then maybe like, half-mile hike, like once I dip off into the timber, if there's access roads or whatever the case is, it makes it a lot more feasible for me to do that hunt in a morning and then get back to work, right? Or do that hunt in an evening and leave work, not have to leave work too early to be able to get to the spot that I want to hunt. Because I had a couple hunts this year that I could have maybe capitalized on or taken advantage of in an evening that I just didn't, because some meetings ran over and stuff like that, and I was trying to get out after work, and the hike in was just going to be so long to get there that I was going to get there and have, barely any time at all of daylight to hunt. And so it just didn't make sense to kind of booger the spot up. And so if an e-bike kind of plays into that strategy, it's like it's much, easier for me to get to that spot in time. Also, obviously doing a little less boogering up of the spot in terms of leaving ground scent and, being able to get in and out, with a manner of stealth, I guess, to kind of preserve the area maybe a little bit for future hunts. So with that, we're going to go ahead and just jump into today's show. As always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today, man, words are hard. It's a Monday and words are already hard. So that's not looking good for the rest of the week. But I got my buddy on from Face Off Ebikes, Mr. Dieter Kochan, and I got your name right. How about that? Yeah,
good to be here. Excited to talk hunting and a little bit of bikes.
That's right, man. So how are things? You're in what? I thought you were in, for some reason I thought you were in Wisconsin for a second, but I think you're in Michigan if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, so way up in the UP of Michigan. So we're 3 hours north of Green Bay. So okay. in the upper part of Michigan, we're closer to Wisconsin than we are to like the Mackinac Bridge and
right. That makes
Michigan.
Sense. Because I was trying to place your accent whenever we first kind of talked. It was a couple months ago we started talking, or we had a phone call, and I was trying to place your accent, and I was like, I feel like he's from Wisconsin. I was like, because the accent feels Wisconsin like, but you also kind of sound like my buddy Todd, who's from the UP. You know what I mean?
Todd's a Yooper, yeah. So yeah, there's a little bit of a Yooper twang in there. So
yeah, and then
I know Todd.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, Todd's a good guy. He is the guy who has helped me on my traditional bow hunting journey more than anybody. I kind of was inspired by another guy from your neck of the woods, not Michigan, but Wisconsin originally, Jared Scheffler. So he was the one who kind of inspired me, watching him, chase down big deer with a stick bow. And then when I finally got ready to make the plunge and start really shooting one, about a year ago now, actually, I went to, Todd doesn't live far from me, so I drove over to his place, because he had been on me for probably 2 years of like, when you going to make the change? When you going to get a stick bow? He's like, I got one for you. He's like the drug dealer down the street trying to sell me a stick bow. He wasn't trying to sell me a stick bow, but trying to get me to pick one up. And so last year I was finally like, I was like, okay. And so I went over to his place, and he helped me make my first kind of zero arrow, to kind of, and he actually gave me a bow. So, he's a good representative for you Yoopers, because they don't make him much nicer and much better than Todd. So
yeah, he's a real nice guy, and I listened to that podcast, so he helped you out and kind of because it's a simplistic way to do it, but probably pretty overwhelming at the beginning when you just don't know where to start. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's like I like to tinker with gear, but for whatever reason, my bow and kind of arrow setups historically, it's like I wasn't ever much of a tinkerer with that. I would tinker with making my own gear for saddle hunting. Like I have a sewing machine, so I'd sew my own aiders for the longest time and stuff like that. Like I was always into tinkering around that stuff. But for whatever reason, my bow and my arrows, I'd fletch my own arrows and stuff like that, but I'd never tuned my own bow, or I always had a buddy who owned a shop here local to me that I'd always just kind of take my stuff to and be like, just get me dialed in and set up, and then I'll shoot, And so the traditional bit, is much more in the hand of the shooter, right? And like you shooting the bow. And so I was like, oh man, it's going to take me forever to learn this on YouTube. I was like, Todd wants to show me, he'll show me a good way. He's been doing it for years. I was like, so I'll trust him. And he actually gave me a bow to use to start with, which was awfully nice of him. So I'm on my way.
Yeah.
Didn't get it out in the woods this year because I had a deer I was chasing. I didn't want to take any chances with, but this is the year, that we make the move. But so man, I was going to ask you this question, but growing up, like you gave me a little bit of your background where you were, born in Canada, grew up in the States, right? In the UP, right? And I was going to ask, like, how did you get started hunting? But like, I feel like where you're from, it's probably very similar to Pennsylvania, where it's kind of a birthright, where it's like once you're born a guy in that part of the country or in Pennsylvania, it's like you're gonna pick up a gun or you're gonna pick up a bow by the time you're age 12.
Yeah, I had a weird path, I guess. I've lived in the United States pretty much my whole life. Like I was born in Canada only because both my parents were Canadian, and my dad was finishing up his PhD in Toledo, Ohio. And my mom was pregnant. She flew back to Canada because they had health care. Had me in Canada, and then I've been in the United States ever since. And I actually grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, so southern Wisconsin. And that's where I didn't get into hunting till high school, where one of the guys I played hockey with, his family was big into hunting. So starting when I was in my sophomore years, when I started, I was just tagging along with them. And it was good just because, like, his dad taught me a lot and learning from them, but it was kind of, you're on your own, willing to, experiment, try this, try that, mostly fail. Like, I think I didn't see a deer that first year, but, I was hooked right away, regardless of, the lack of success early on. And then hunted Wisconsin for a couple years, and then picked it up again more serious once I went to college, and would have been Marquette, Michigan, which is, I think Todd's from, I think he's just south of Marquette, so that's like an hour from him. That I played college hockey at Northern Michigan University, and after college I ended up playing 10 years professionally, and with that I was bouncing all over the place. Played a lot of out east. There's a lot of minor league teams out east. I played in Connecticut, Massachusetts, New York, Maine. So I got to hunt all those states because we'd practice in the morning till like noon, and then you had the whole afternoon. So I was pretty much, anytime we didn't have a game at night, I was in the woods hunting, and I got to hunt a lot of different states, a lot of different terrain, and it forced me to be really mobile before mobile was really a thing, just because I couldn't leave stuff in the tree because I could get traded or called up. I was mostly in the minors, but I spent some time in the NHL, so I could get called up, and I couldn't have stuff hanging in trees. So
right.
I started saddle hunting in like 2005, I think, after I read John Eberhardt's book and bought a saddle back when you couldn't hardly find the things. And
how uncomfortable were those back then, right?
I don't know if they were that much. Like the old trophy line was actually fairly comfortable. I mean, if you monkeyed with the bridge a little bit, like there's only so many things you can do to a saddle. Like I think a lot of it, the two panels have gotten more comfortable, but some of the early minimalist ones, I don't even know if they were much more comfortable, but definitely more mobile. You could pack less, you could have more spots kind of prepped and ready to go. So that's kind of how I got my start bow hunting.
Wow, that's wild, man. How was I don't know that I've ever met anybody who played professional hockey. So I just, what was that experience like? That's got to be kind of, well, one, how was it right out of college? Did you start playing pro hockey?
Yeah, so out of college, I basically had to start at the bottom. Like I started at the lowest level of professional hockey possible, and then by my third year playing, just everything lined up. I was playing really well. I ended up signing with Tampa Bay and playing with Tampa Bay the end of my third year, and then from there on I was always on like a two-way minor league contract where I was pretty much the third goalie in a system where if somebody got hurt or traded, then I got called up, and I think I ended up playing in like 20 games or something like that. But it was a amazing experience. And, it feels like it was a lifetime ago at this point. So.
Right. That's awesome, man. Who was there anybody when you were in net that you took that ripped off a shot at you where you were like, I can't believe I just stopped a shot from that guy? Like, was there any of those moments, like when you make it to the league and you're like, because I imagine you're like me when I was growing up a musician, like there was these guys that I grew up, idolizing and stuff like that. And then I actually got to a point to where it's like I was actually, working with some of them and like playing with some of them and stuff like that. And it was just kind of, had a moment where I was like, man, I can't believe I just played guitar with so-and-so. You know what I mean? Like you had those like little moments, was there any of those moments for you and when you were, in the net and you're like, I can't believe that dude just shot a puck and I stopped it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my first game was against the Dallas Stars, and my kind of idol growing up was Ed Belfour. Mm-hmm. And so it was against him. So there you're stretching out at like the red line and he's right next to you. And
did you ask him for his autograph?
I should have. And then there's a couple, I think, like some of these names are older now, so they're big names from years ago. But like Joe Sakic he was always known for a quick release, and when the first time he shot the puck, like it was past me before I even thought about moving. Like it was like something I'd never ever seen before. So after that, I was more prepared for it. And then I remember one time in Madison Square Garden, we were playing against the Rangers, and Mark Messier, who, like, he was an idol growing up.
Yeah, it's huge.
He'd always come down the off wing, and then he'd shoot off his back foot, and he'd go low blocker. Like, I'd watched dozens of highlights of him taking that exact shot. And sure enough, he comes down that wing. I'm like, holy crap, is he going to do it? And he did I knew exactly where he was going to shoot because I had seen it so many times growing up, and he off the back foot, low blocker, and knew where that one was going, was able to stop that one.
Nice. That's awesome, man. That's got to feel pretty good, man. Like just being able to have that experience of sharing the ice with guys that you grew up watching and stuff like that. And I always kind of tell people if they've never had that experience, if there's something you're really into, whether it's hockey, music, football, baseball, whatever it is, when you get to see that 1% of the 1%, like how good they actually really are, like it's mind blowing. Like you can watch it on TV all you want, whatever activity it is, but those folks that are that 1% of that 1% are just like a different breed, and it's just unreal how much better they are than everybody else.
Yeah, you couldn't say it better than that. I mean, it was unbelievable how much better like the superstars were compared to like the other guys are still good, but like how the superstars can just get to that level where they're just on a totally different stratosphere compared to everybody else.
Yeah. I can remember I was like so when I went to the band I was in, we went to record and we got to spend some time with some of the guys from Stone Temple Pilots and stuff like that. And that was like some of the guys I grew up like idolizing. And so that was kind of crazy, like, to meet them and spend some time in a room with them and stuff. But then I actually went and played with a band. I did some auditioning with a band they're actually still out playing now. It's a band called Shine down there from Florida. Like we knew their A&R guy. We played a bunch of shows with them. They had an issue with their guitar player, and their A&R guy gave me a call to come in to do some auditioning to maybe, and this was during their Sounds of Madness record. And so I went into the rehearsal space to rehearse with them because they were rehearsing in Orlando, and that's where I lived. And like the band I was in, we were good. We had a deal, did some, some touring and stuff. And I remember walking in that room and playing with those guys, and like the singer had taken like probably a couple months off. I think he told me after that because he had been in LA doing all the vocals for the record. So he took a couple months off after doing a lot of singing to kind of rejuvenate his voice. Right. And so he apologized to me after like the first couple songs that we played through and was like, hey, my voice is kind of rough today, because I'm just kind of getting back in the swing of things. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, dude, his voice sounds like the record. I'm like, and that was like, and we had played with them on the road before and stuff like that. And I'd played with a bunch of other big bands on the road and stuff, but that was the first time I'd ever been in a rehearsal space with guys that play like 300 dates a year, and there's no effects on anything. There's no big show. There's no lights. It's just them, their instruments, and playing, right? And the difference between like the band that I was in, or the band that I had been in that I had built, and them, it was like, you could see clearly there was levels to this, right? It's like, this is what happens whenever you spend 270 nights a year on the road playing every night. Like, you get this good. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's funny how, it's the same thing in deer hunting too, right? It's like the guys who spend a lot of time in the timber, a lot of time on their craft. It's the same thing. Like, there's the guys who are good hunters, and then there's those guys that are just like the cut above. Like I always say, like the Andy Mays, right? That are just like you don't know how he does it, but how he does it is just like the constant work and the constant kind of honing of his craft.
Yeah, I think it is in anything. I mean, anything in life. I mean, give advice to any kids out there. It's like, you look at these superstars, whether they're athletes or hunters or musicians or whatever, and they're working 100 times harder at their craft than you probably are. And that's the one thing you don't understand. And with hockey, you just assume that the superstars, they're just superstars. But then when you practice with them and watch them practice, and they're the first one on the ice, the last one off, they're doing extra drills on their own time. They're just doing all these things behind the scenes that translates to success, whether it's hockey or hunting or anything. So put the work in and you get the results.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and it's funny because I don't know if you feel the same way, but I feel like when you see high achievers in anything, like you said, whether it's hockey, hunting, football, music, whatever it happens to be, there's this, at least I've found, because for me, it's like being on jiu-jitsu mats and like rolling with people who are new to jiu-jitsu to like, there's some guys that are like a couple stripe competition black belts, that's what they do, and the biggest difference that I see, and it kind of translates to hunting, translates to all these areas, is that those folks who are next level, and I'm curious if you feel the same way, it's not just the amount of work that they put in. It's like, there's certainly like the extra that they're doing, right? But I've also found like they're very aware and reflective. Like they're very honest with themselves about what their shortcomings are or what holes they have that they could fill. And when they do practice or when they're going out to scout or whatever the case is, like it's very intentional. Like they don't just go out and kind of wing it. Like even like for a practice or a scouting session or whatever, it's like what they're doing in that session is very intentional to get better at this thing, and that's at least what I've seen. Do you kind of find the same thing?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a combination of that and then their ability to process information at a different level, where like in hockey where things slow down, or even hunting where, one guy can walk through the woods and might not see something where somebody else is able to look at that sign and interpret what the heck's going on. And, I've started to see that more and more in hunting. And, I had the privilege of meeting Andy May last summer and talking to him and working with Andre DeQuisto and just how they look at things at a different level or a different angle than most people, and they're getting more information out of what other people might just kind of blow off or see but not really interpret what they're looking at.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, because they're I always kind of frame it like this, like they're able to almost work and deal or play within the concept of the thing they're looking at, not so much the thing exactly that they're looking at. Right. It's like there's a structure, or there's like an overarching kind of thing that they're able to kind of see aside from like, oh, that's a rub. It's like, no, they see the rub, but the rub is just like the thing that kind of like creates this little Pandora's box for them of possibilities. Right. And like all those possibilities are the things that they're exploring. They're not exploring so much the rub, right, or the scrape or whatever the sign happens to be or the track. It's like, it's the spider web that thing creates is the parts that they're kind of super interested in. Right.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the best way I can kind of explain it. It's like, it'd be interesting to get into the minds of those folks. Like if there was like a way, I'm thinking, back to like, I think, what was that movie? I'm going to date myself now. Like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, where they could get in like the little machine and they were like going through the body and stuff like that. Like to get into like some of these whitetail killers' minds and see what they think or see or feel whenever they see certain things, would just be really interesting,
Definitely. And podcasts have been,
certainly,
awesome for that, where like before podcasts and stuff, you didn't even have the ability to get just to scrape the surface of these guys' brain and their process and stuff like that. I mean, magazine articles were basically useless. You could get a little information here or there, but I mean, to shorten the curve where, somebody really has the ability, if they want to put the work in, to go from year 1 to, year 3 and 4 and have dramatically different success.
Right. So for you, kind of in that similar vein, for you, what was, that moment or that thing or, something that you learned that started changing how you approached hunting? Because you said, earlier, like a lot of people start, you just make a lot of mistakes and you're not sure what you're doing. It takes you a while to see a deer even, all those types of things. So what was it for you that, was kind of like an aha moment, right? Where you were like, I need to do this. This is the part that I'm missing. Like, was there ever a kind of a moment like that for you?
I think the first kind of blueprint for me, because it was before podcasts and before everything else, was John Eberhardt's book, because it did a good job of kind of dialing into season, month to month to month, his process. And before that, you'd get an article in a magazine or something. It would be rut hunting tactics, and it'd be such generic information, and
right,
you wouldn't even know when. Like, I don't even know if the article would even say when the rut is. Like, you were just like guessing when stuff was happening, and there'd be a big picture of a buck shot wherever, and basically no information. So that kind of gave me the first steps to a process, and then for me it evolved, more and more, where you'd take kind of information from here, from there, and because you have to shape it around your own strategy, because you may listen to a podcast and what I'm saying might translate to you entirely different than what it means to me. So you almost can't take stuff at face value. You have to take that information, apply it to what's going to work for you. Because if I tell somebody, you need to hike 3 miles in and do this or do that, if they're never going to do it, it's just useless information for them. So if they want to hunt next to the highway, then they should listen to people who hunt next to the highway. Like, I can't do it exactly like Andy May. I can't do it exactly like Andre DeQuisto. I have to take kind of pieces of what makes them successful and put it into what's going to work for me, because it ends up being a grind every year. Like, it's never easy. Like, you got to be able to go from plan A to B to C to D, and sometimes it's just a matter of sticking it out, where I think I'm really good at grinding. I can go the whole year. And I was even asking Andy, I was like, how do you, like, I want to be better in 4 days. I'm sick of being good in 4 months. Like, I need this to be easier. Like, tell me what you do. Like, when you have a 4-day window, what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize being able to visually see observation type stuff, or do you prioritize deep sign? And even for him, he can't, every situation is different. So, I mean, one time it might be this, one time it might be this, but you just have to, I mean, a lot of it is sticking after it, because you're not going to learn if you're just a couple weekends a year hunter. And I think that might be somebody's limitations, but like, if you have the opportunity, the more time you spend in the woods, the better you're going to get.
Yeah, I think that's so important, what you just said there at the end, because I think a lot of times people, because we're using Andy as an example, it's like Andy didn't get that good in like a year. It took him a long time, and if you ask him about it, it took him a long time of like, to get to where he's at in terms of like his ability to kind of like understand, read, make decisions and stuff like that, right? Like that's something that he learned over time. It wasn't like in season 1 he was like, I got this all figured out. It was a lot of just time in woods, time in viewing scenarios, and just spending time doing it. And I think that's the one thing that people kind of get lost in a little bit, is that, if you're a guy that you can only spend 5 weekends during the fall hunting, 10 days, your expectation should, you should rein your expectations in, because it's really hard to kind of make something happen in that kind of time frame when it's not back to back to back to back days, right? It's like if you said you had 10 days consecutively, I think it's a little bit different, right? But if you're hunting 5 weekends and you're going to hunt Saturday, Sunday, it's Pennsylvania, you can't hunt Sundays, but it's presumed someone's in a state that they can, right? All the stuff that happened between Sunday and Saturday that happened in the woods that you have no clue about is to your detriment, right? Because things shift during that time of year so quick. 5 days out of the woods is like starting over almost. You know what I mean? And so, having, your expectations kind of calibrated to the amount of time you can spend in the woods, and not just the amount of time, but the amount of consecutive time you can spend in the wood, I think is important. Otherwise, you leave kind of feeling, disheartened or like you failed or whatever. But it's like, man, most people don't fill tags, especially if they're on, if they have families and work and stuff like that, and they can only get out on certain weekends. It's like, that's tough. It's like there's going to, if you fill a tag every 2 to 3 years, like with that type of schedule, like that's pretty good in my book.
Yeah. And you have to set your own, like your level of success isn't going to be mine. Like you can't hold yourself to a standard that's not obtainable. I mean, you have to have the deer on the property you're hunting, and you have to have the time to, get enough information and make the right decisions. So if you can't do any of that, success can mean whatever it means, whether it's just like going there for a weekend and having fun with family and enjoying camaraderie. That can be success. If it's harvesting a small buck or a doe, that's success. So everybody's got to hunt their own hunt and, enjoy what they're doing, because you don't know how many years you're going to be able to do it.
That's just it, man. Like that's, I try to remind myself that every year, because it can be, you can get stressed out about it depending on what your scenario is and stuff like that. And this year for me was one that was kind of stressful, and in a good way. I wasn't complaining about it at all. Spent more time in the woods this year than I have in any year that I can remember, to be honest. But I constantly reminded myself, like, be where your feet are. There's no place you'd rather be than right here. Even when it was sucking, I would tell myself that, because to your point, it's like, man, you just don't know how many opportunities you're going to get to do that. And, every time you get a chance to, it's, it's a blessing, truly, And so I try to remind myself of that. A lot of people would like to have my problems, is what I like to say. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like somewhere, someone told me one time this quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but they basically said, you're living someone else's dream life right now. Like there's someone out there who could only dream of the things you're getting to do, And so I try to remind myself of that, whenever I'm feeling crappy, that it ain't that bad. But so speaking of like places that you're hunting, man, so you're in the UP, right? So what type of areas because I don't know a whole lot about the UP, to be quite honest. So give me a little bit of like a rundown of like type of terrain and habitat and stuff that you're kind of getting into.
So where I'm at, it's probably something similar to at least some areas of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
We get a lot of snow, so on a normal winter, we might get 300 inches of snow. So the deer are going to migrate. We do have some hilly, we'll call it mountainous. There's like ski hills and stuff like that, especially once you get along Lake Superior. So it's terrain like that. It's low deer density. We have wolves, bears. So it can be definitely challenging, very low amount of ag. So you don't have the classic bed to food. So it's a lot of browse. For me, it ends up being a lot of scrape hunting, which is probably the only consistent movement. And the hardest part's finding a mature deer, where at least in Michigan, I'm forced to run a lot of cameras in the velvet season to try to find something that I want to go after. So it's just spreading out. The one good thing about Michigan is there's a lot of public land, so you're not running into fence lines and property barriers. You can really, if you're able to find a good buck, you can probably hunt it to the ends of the earth and not run into any issues where you're prevented from going any further. Right. But it's challenging, but it's fun. It's rewarding. There are good deer here, but it's different than, I hunt Wisconsin too every year. It's obviously different than Wisconsin, and I like to take trips to different states and kind of see different things and experience different parts of the season.
I got a couple questions. Is the area you hunt in the UP, would you consider it to be low deer density?
It is low, yeah.
It is low? Okay.
Like if you'd be lucky to find, you are lucky to find a handful of mature bucks, like to get some older age class deer. It's difficult to find that, especially if you're not baiting. You're allowed to bait up here, so that's going to concentrate some amount of deer. But, as a person who likes to hunt scrapes, I've really looked to guys like, Troy Pottinger. Some of the stuff that he talks about with his scrape hunting tactics have been successful for me, where that's kind of the one thing that consistently brings a deer in it, especially for about a 2-week window. You'll have every decent buck in an area, if it's a good scrape, show up at that scrape, and that's kind of the most effective thing. And then late season's another time of year where it kind of just shrinks the playing field, where if you're able to find where they're browsing on acorns or starting to migrate, then you can find some better deer that way. I've had a lot of success late season. The last 2 years, for whatever reason, my target buck has shed in December, so that's kind of hurt the chances a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
But it's fun. It's a challenge, but it's definitely rewarding when you get it done.
Yeah. It's funny because he mentioned Eberhard earlier, and like for me, that was also when you mentioned his book. Was it the Bow Hunting Pressured Whitetails? Is that the one you read?
Yeah, he had a couple of them. He had that, and then he had, I think I even got the videos or whatever. But there's a lot of, like, he's a polarizing figure.
Sure.
And there's if you really dig into what he's saying, like he actually agrees with everybody else. But
that's what I was going to say, because I've had John on years ago, and I'll still text with him from time to time and stuff like that. And what made a big change for me was I kind of found John and Dan and Fault like at the same time, and I was reading John's books, and I was listening to Dan and like reading the forum and stuff like that. And forever there was this debate about how they were different. And I was like, man, when you get right down to it, I was like, they're doing a lot of the same stuff. Like the biggest difference between the two is one likes to wear scent lock, the other one doesn't care. Like I was like, literally, that's the difference, But
the thing is, if you take both their hunting strategies and put them in the same spot, they'd sit in the same tree.
Yes.
Because John prefers the downwind side of feed trees like apple trees. Well, that conveniently puts
you had an advantage with
the wind in your favor.
Yeah.
But he does it because that's the bucks in his thought process is going to be on the downwind side of the tree. Yeah, on that scrape. But it's basically the same exact spot that Dan would be sitting in. But John likes to talk about scent control more often.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But like I read his book, and it was that was a big change for me. And it was interesting to hear you say that and you talk about scrapes, because that's a lot of the way I hunt too. Predominantly because of being sometimes limited on time. I've taken to like using, trail cameras and kind of time stamping scrapes and understanding when they get hot, like different ones. That way I know I have this one this week and this one over here this week and this one over here this week. And I can kind of rotate around like through the season, knowing I'm going to be in the right area. If I'm in and around the hub, using that scrape as a hub, if I'm around it during the right week, I'll be in the game, type of thing is kind of like the approach that I'll take. So I'm just curious for you, whenever you're using scrapes, like how are you setting up on those? Is it strictly like a, last 2 weeks of October type of play? Are you hunting right on the scrape? Are you hunting the travel to and from? Like, how are you typically using those?
So they usually heat up. It's usually like the first 2 weeks in November seem to be the best like scrape week up here, and then they'll kick back in December. We have our buck to doe ratio is terrible up here, so we'll have does going into estrus in December and January and, times they shouldn't really if you had a better buck to doe ratio. But for me up here, it's those first 2 weeks of November. And when I stopped, like everybody hunts over bait up here. And when I stopped hunting over bait and then I just started, hunting, concentrating more on scrapes and travel areas, I started to see way more deer. I went from, you might see a buck at like last light or after dark to all of a sudden you'd see 6 deer in a day. So that the success went way up as soon as got away from bait piles, just because the deer are so conditioned to that, and they're making a choice whether they're more concerned about their safety or they're more concerned about their belly when they come to a bait pile. So scrapes, the other thing was if you can make them like you're talking about, where, a lot of time it's making a lot of mock scrapes where there's not that many up here. Like I can walk for, I can put 10 miles in a day and I'd be happy to find one good scrape. And there's just not that many compared to, if I go around Wisconsin, you'll see 100 of them in a day. So up here, they're more difficult to find. So you can put them in areas you want them, and hopefully they get taken over. And when they get taken over, then not only gives you a place to hunt the first 2 weeks of November, but it also gives you a place to put your camera where you're getting all that intel when you're not in the tree, or when I'm in Wisconsin, I can come back and check all these cameras, and I'm not playing from behind with no clue what the heck's going on. Right. You're getting that information, and you can put it somewhere where you're going to get kind of a natural picture compared to a bait pile. It's just they're so impacted by the negative. Yeah.
The negative interactions that they have.
Yeah, the negative
them.
Interactions. Yeah. So
I can't remember when I was talking, if I said the last 2 weeks of December. If I did, I meant the last 2 weeks of October for scrapes, but it might have been a slip there. That's interesting that you find them still like effective, like into November that far, because like for me, like my favorite time of year to hunt, at least in PA, is typically like middle of October, oddly enough. Like that's when I find that I can actually really build strategies around scrape activity, is that middle of October kind of time frame. And then of course bleed into like the last 2 weeks, but like that 15th, 16th, 17th ish date for me has been good. And then it's like the first couple days of November, it's like that's when I feel like it's like they make like a last run here, and then after that it's almost like someone turns off the faucet. Like the deer just like, I won't say abandon them completely, but returns drastically diminished. I'll say at that point. But it could also be I think the areas that I'm hunting, I think, don't have low deer density. I think that they have low deer utilization of all the ground, right? Because it's big woods, and so they're kind of bunched up into certain areas where they have like all the right stuff, right? And so I think that plays something into it. So I think that they're not checking scrapes quite as often because they're like in these little pods. I think maybe I'd be curious for you. Do you think that those scrapes remain active to a degree later into November because of the amount that these deer are having to travel, like between, finding another doe or whatever, just given the buck to doe ratio and just like the density of the deer in general?
I think it does have to do with how they're nomadic, where like the ones I'm picking up the first 2 weeks of November aren't deer that I really have dialed into where I'm getting them on velvet. So those are the ones that are just showing up, and I have good travel court areas where they come through and they kind of hang out for like a week and then they might disappear. So that's where those scrapes are paying off. If I can find one in velvet, then that's a deer I can hunt earlier. Or I've seen over the years where they'll come back to if you can get them on camera in velvet, you can kill them at the end of December. Like they'll return to their home area for a week or two before they completely migrate off. So just kind of two strategies, and I'm usually in Wisconsin the end of October. So if I can find one in velvet, I'll hunt them early October. and then I'll get my cameras, and then when I come back in November, then I can hopefully jump on something that's starting to come through, because they do, like, just talking with other people who have ever gotten deer that I have on camera, like they're, I mean, miles away, and they just do big loops, and it's really difficult, like pinning down bedding areas. Like I don't think they use the same beds. They're just all over the place.
Yeah, I feel the same way, because I'm imagining, and I wanted to ask you this too, is I'm assuming like the places you're hunting in the UP are like pretty, like you would classify them as big woods settings, right? Like just like vast acreage essentially, right?
Yeah, I have probably like 5 different areas that are all 50,000 acres. So
right.
Big stuff.
Yeah. So yeah, that's those are challenging places to pin down bedding, right? Because like the place that I hunt is big woods, a lot of acreage, and I've played hell trying to find bedding. You know, I will say this particular area, I've scouted it like 4 years, and this was the first season that I really dedicated to hunting it. And I will say that I've only ever found what I believe to be one buck bed that was used habitually. You know what I mean? Like that, there was a rub line that went to it. That's how I found it. When I got to it, it was down to the dirt. There was hair in it, right? He had a clear cut that was probably 10 plus years old to his back, and he could see for probably 60, 70 yards in front of him where he was laying, right? And I'm like, yeah, no wonder why this gets used so frequently, right? I was like, it's like the perfect setup. But that's literally the only one I've found in like 4 years that was set up like that, you know? And I feel like in some of those big wood settings, like those deer they just bed wherever they want to bed. Like they just lay down.
Yeah, they just walk and lay down. And yeah, I'm the same way. I can think of a handful where it's like, holy cow, this is a buck bed where there's big rub and stuff like that. But for the most part, I think and I don't know if it's the wolves that impact the behavior or what it is, but it seems they just walk till they want to take a break, and then they keep walking. Yeah.
Agreed. So how's your strategy changed when you're heading to like Wisconsin? You know, because I can understand when you say, you know, you could walk 10 miles and find one scrape and you'd be excited. I'm the same way in this area. I might find some smaller ones, but like I might only find one that I'm like, yep, scrape, licking branch. I bet there's doe bedding over here, or I can put a couple pieces together that makes me feel like that's a good one, you know. And then I go places, you know, like whether I'm going to Ohio or whether I'm going to whatever other state, and I feel like I'm falling over scrapes, you know. And then it becomes a different challenge of, you know, not just finding it, but now it's like discerning what is a good one versus that I want to use as like part of my hunt strategy, and what is one that, like, you know, isn't worth spending my time around, right?
Yeah, I do kind of a bit of everything. Like I've always thought that, you know, the more well-rounded you can be, the better off you're going to be in any situation. So when I go to Wisconsin, I mean, typically I haven't overly relied on trail cameras in the past. I don't know if I might end up doing that a little bit more, just because as soon as you start trying to shoot bigger ones, you got to at least know that one's there, because otherwise you're just letting stuff walk by and you have no chance. But so that might be the only reason I start using trail cameras, just so if I can dial in something really big. But for the most part, it's just a combination of everything. Like I like hunting swamps, water, creeks, hill country. There's kind of a bit of everything. And, you know, my strategy, I used to be an all-day guy, and that was probably part of the John Eberhart philosophy. But I've learned over the years, just kind of looking at my success numbers, it was like I'm shooting like 80% of my deer in the morning. It's like I got to get more out of my evening spots. Like none of these spots are paying off in the evening. Like I'm way better off sitting till midday, getting down and going to, you know, an evening type location that's a destination area. So it's trying to do that, trying to scout more, you know, getting down, not settling on spots where, you know, you're just hoping and praying that it's going to happen. You know, it seems like if you can find spots and scout that all of a sudden are like, holy cow, there's something huge in here. This is just tore up. And then you sit it, and sure enough, you're having encounters. You know, if you just redid that philosophy every day rather than just kind of hunting average spots and getting average results, and really kind of, you know, I'm going to find them. I'm actually going to hunt. Like, I'm going to hunt. I'm not just going to frickin' sit here and hope and pray. I'm going to hunt.
Yeah, I think that's the when you said hoping and praying, right? I feel like a lot of people do hope hunting, you know, and I don't think they do it intentionally. You know, I think that, you know, I think we're all guilty of it. There's times where I've gotten into a tree and I'm like, man, I should move. And I'm like, man, I don't want to move all my stuff again. You know what I mean? Like, we've all been there before. You're like day 8 of a hunt, you know, and you're really like, I should move. I should hike that mile over to this spot because I think it's probably going to be better. And you're just like, man, I do not want to tear all my crap down again and move, right? Like, we've all been there and made that choice, right? But but there's a lot of truth to, you know, that real time intel that you can pick up. You know, there's a balance between, you know, I think we give too much credence to like boogering up spots or bumping deer. I think we worry too much about that. I think you don't want to make a habit of blowing deer out and stuff like that, right? But I think if you need to get down and learn something and try to figure something out or find a better spot or whatever, like, you're better doing that and bumping a few deer than you are just sitting in the spot that you're in that you have no chance, right?
And especially seeing no deer.
And see no deer, right? Yeah. Because I've always said it's, you know, especially whenever I'm out of state hunting, and this is something I have to kind of rectify with myself, and I've said it a million times on this show, I'm a way better hunter out of state than I am in my own state, because when I'm out of state, I know I'm on short time, and so I'm aggressive. You know, it's like I will walk into spots purposefully to see if I kick any deer out, to know that there's deer there, right? I just want to get proof of life, and then I'll start working from there, right? Where locally, you know, I'll spend a lot more time being a little bit more careful because I already kind of know where the deer are at, you know, and I'm trying to be, you know, more strategic, I guess, if you will. But I'm more successful out of state, you know, which means I should, you know, probably burn the boot leather a little bit more and, you know, take some more chances. But this year was one of those years where that was my strategy, which you were talking about, where it's like I would hunt in the mornings and I would get down, and this was like October, and I would get down by just say 10 o'clock, you know, in October, and I would hike until I had about 2 hours of daylight left, unless I found something that really piqued my interest before that, you know. And wherever I happened to be with 2 hours left of light, I would just get into a tree, you know, unless I had a destination to be at in the evening, you know. And it's one of the best seasons. I mean, I didn't fill the tag this year, but it was like one of the best seasons I had, you know, just because I was in deer almost every hunt, it seemed like, you know, and I saw a couple really good bucks this year. It just wasn't the one I was trying to kill. And so, you know, there's a lot of value in just getting down, moving, and trying to be in tune with the spot that you're hunting in real time and not trying to play catch up. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, where if you're a guy who hunts just like 2 days on the weekends, man, I'd probably spend Saturday scouting, hunt the evening to set up your hunts for Sunday. Is probably what I would do. You know what I mean?
It's really hard mentally, because it's you know this one spot, it might be average, but are you willing to sacrifice greatness or a total disaster for
right.
for what you already know? And I think you have to shoot for greatness, and because if you're gonna, and the worst thing I get caught doing is, like, let's say you have a week-long hunt and you hunt for 5 days, and then you have 2 days left, and then your decision is to hunt the best stuff that really sucked for the first 5 days anyway, instead of like totally going off the playbook and shooting for the fences. I think you have to shoot for the fences sometimes, and, you know, not settle for just average, because average only works out every so often. Like, if you want to like consistently get on better deer, I think you have to really get outside of your comfort zone, and whether that's hunting stuff that's totally different than what you're kind of used to, I think that's where we're gonna get better, and in the long run it's gonna pay off.
Yeah. I think sometimes guys will, you know, make those decisions to maybe forego the the moving or, the making an aggressive move or whatever the case is, just for the purposes of like efficiency, right? To where it's like they don't want to make that, I got to hike all the way back out to the truck and then I got to drive 2 miles down to this road, right? And for me, especially the place that I've been hunting, if you're in an area that has the ability to use some convenient access, if you will, right, it starts to make things a little bit different, especially like, if you're trying to do like a round of trail camera checks, right? Like, 'cause sometimes like I'll be in an area where it's like, I got to check some trail cameras. I haven't been there in a couple weeks and I need to do that. And I want to figure out what deer are where, and then I want to make a hunt plan. Right. But it's like, maybe my trail cameras are all spread out. Right. And it takes me a day or a day and a half to check them all. Right. So I've been considering, right, and been kind of and talked to you about this, right, and been kind of kicking around the idea of using an e-bike, because there's some areas that I can use an e-bike to kind of get from point A to point B, more quickly, and then be able to jump off into the timber, and get to my trail camera more quickly, or whatever the case is. Or in the case of this year, whenever I was chasing that deer, there were some evening hunts that I skipped because I just couldn't get out of work quick enough. And I would look at my watch and be like, man, by the time I drive there, get out, and then make the hike to where I need to get to, and then jump into the timber where I need to get to for where I'm going to set up. I'm like, man, I'm talking about like 30 minutes of light. You know what I mean? To where it's like, if I could get there a little bit more quickly, I probably pull off a couple of those hunts, and then who knows what happens in those hunts, right? And so for a guy who's thinking about, going the e-bike route, I wanted to talk to you about what are the things I should consider when looking at e-bikes, because I'm a complete noob when it comes to it, right? There's a lot of things that I am, I don't want to say fanatical, that I'm a nerd about. And e-bikes is just one of those things where it's like, I've looked at them online, I've talked to people who have them, and I hear both sides of it, where some people have good experiences, some people have had not great experiences with products and stuff like that. And so I wanted to talk to you about the straight dope, about what should I look at, what are the most important things to kind of be aware of, what should, as a hunter, what should you ask to get out of an e-bike, and what is the most effective way to kind of use it, if you will.
All right. So I guess I'll circle back to part of that question. So remind me, I'll just talk overall philosophy. Like, it's amazing what you can accomplish with these things. It's completely changed how I hunt and how I look at like what my strategy is going to be. Selling bikes, I also get to talk to my customers who call me with stories just like you're talking about. I had one guy got off late from work, would have never hunted there because just didn't have time. He's like, well, I can get there with the bike. Drove right to the base of the tree, was there for 5 minutes, shot his target buck. Other situations where, like, Andre DeQuisto's totally redesigned his whole farm, where like he's driving through corn, he's got trails cut, and they're just an amazing tool, because the deer will tolerate the bike way more than they will like other ATVs and vehicles like that. Like, they just, as long as you don't stop, they'll just look at, like, they could be right off the trail. Like, I've seen a bunch of bigger deer just right off the trail where, you kind of like turn to get a little spotlight shot, but
right.
But you could see them standing right there, and they'll just wait for you to
cruise on by,
to go by. Yeah, they can. It's a good balance where they're not. I mean, they're quiet, but they're not too quiet where you totally startle them.
Yeah, they're not sneaky quiet.
Yeah, but it's not an intimidating noise to where, as long as it doesn't stop and you get off, they're just going to let you go by.
Right.
So you can get way more out of it that way. As a public land hunter, the ability to hide my truck is unbelievable. Like, to park in one area and hunt a different area without having to worry about guys like wondering, is there deer? Like, especially when you're talking about hiding small spots.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you have a small spot, that's a really good spot. If you park there 1 to 2 days, good luck. It's burnt. Like, there's going to be other guys. But if you can hide your truck, just I'm driving the bike probably 90% of the time just down the highway, 1 to 2 miles from wherever my truck's parked. Try to hide the truck, park in weird spots to kind of misrepresent what I'm doing or whatever. But using the bikes that way, and then the trail camera thing, I mean, you can check 10 so that's 10 times the information. So if you looked at someone without a bike, or even you last year, like if you looked at your season and I said, I'll give you 10 times as much information as you had last year to make a decision. Yeah. So with all that extra information, you're going to make better decisions. You're going to put yourself in better opportunities. You're going to access areas that you might not have been able to. And even for me, I'm almost hunting closer to the road, where like if you have a huge swamp and there's a parking lot and a parking lot and 3 miles in between, well, nobody's walking 1.5 miles down the road to jump in there. Like, have you ever seen I haven't seen very many guys walking down the side of the road with a bow.
No.
Compared to how many you see walking down the trailhead. So if you're accessing from different angles, doing different things, it just kind of, it opens up your playbook to make different decisions.
That was the biggest thing for me, and was like a couple things that you mentioned. One was being able to park in one spot and hunt another that's a fair distance away from my truck, right? Would be huge. I was hunting last year and I ran into a couple guys. I thought it was a buddy of mine. His truck looked familiar, but it wasn't him. It happened to be two other fellas. And we just kind of got to chatting, and they were like, "Hey, we've seen you parked over here, here, here. You've basically been living here since beginning of October. Are you after this, such and such?" Like they knew what I was chasing based on where I was parking. Yep. You know what I mean? Because they were also, come to find out, they were also interested in the same target, right? And so it would have been really good for me to not have them know exactly where I was at. You know what I mean? Would have been helpful. And then the ability just to ditch along the road and jump into somewhere and not burn your spot. You know what I mean? And then checking trail cameras, man, or even like the one situation I was going to move one evening and I ended up not, because where I really wanted to go, like I was like, there's just no way I'm going to get out in time, or I'm going to get out of the tree in time and get to where I want to get to. And so I settled on like a not great spot, you know what I mean? Just because I was going to observe, it just ended up being an observation hunt as opposed to being really where I wanted to be to try to put an actual hunt on, So, yeah, I mean, you hit a couple things like with the nail on the head for like how to use them. But I mean, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just wanted to like reiterate, like you checked 3 boxes for me immediately.
And then for me, the most like doing the public land thing is like, it's nerve-wracking at times. Like, when you're getting dressed at the back of your truck and you're just racing, scrambling so that nobody sees you, and then you're freaking running so that, taking that out of the equation where you can be parked in just a stupid area, nice leisurely get dressed, hop on the bike, go for a stroll. You get a nice air-conditioned ride if it's early season. And
right.
You can accomplish way more, be more tactful about it. You're not going to burn spots. You can, even in some states are real e-bike friendly where you can use the bikes more on trails and stuff like that. But even in states that don't allow e-bikes on public land, just to be able to park your car in a different spot, and because guys are hunting trucks now too, like especially if they figure out who you are, or they've seen your truck there a couple times. Like I've seen great spots just get burnt out just because you park right there. Like there's people are walking in, they're checking what's going on. They just assume spots are good. So just taking that out of equation is going to let you hide your spots better than if you're just parking in the parking lots even.
Yeah, shoot, even for hanging trail cameras like in the spring and summer, you know what I mean? Like parking somewhere where you're out of the way to where people don't even realize that you're in there hanging trail cameras. It's like even that far, I would say. And you are right, like, different states have different regulations and stuff like that. But I would say in general, Pennsylvania, there's some stipulations, but there's some stipulations that are different between what we have like here, which are game lands, which, would be your typical like state regulated, hunting lands, if you will. And then there's state parks, and they both have like different regulations and types of trails you can go on, and the different kind of limitations or whatever you want to call it about what the bike can do, what the bike's capable of, how it needs to be used, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, you just have to be kind of read up on that stuff to know what you're getting into. But by and large, you can, the net is you can use them. You just have to know how you're allowed to use them in whatever state you're in.
Yeah. And back to your original question, I think I remember most of it, but like what you need the bike to accomplish is really important, because I sell a lot of bikes in like Pennsylvania, Virginia, anywhere with hills, because if you have steep hills, you need a certain kind of bike. Like you're not going to be able to get away with a bike that might work for a guy in Florida. Like as soon as you're putting hills into the equation and you're expecting the bike to throttle only climb, you're going to need certain parameters with the motor, with the torque in the motor, with the gear ratios. So that's kind of when I went through this journey of, eventually making a bike company. Like it all just started, I grew up around mountain bikes growing up. My father-in-law was actually a Trek dealer, so I understood bikes, how bikes worked. And then once I started hunting more and more when I retired from hockey and that, it was like, I could access different spots, and it just started with pedal bikes, but pedal bikes, like I thought I was in shape, but like when you put hunting clothes on yourself and you're pedaling a bike, like you're just, you end up being a pool of sweat, and you're like, this isn't even,
I've done it a couple times.
This isn't even easier.
Yeah. I've done it a couple times, and there was one spot that I would use like my mountain bike to get into. And it was that experience. I mean, when I hunt that place, I do use the bike. But I hunt that spot like on very like specific dates and very seldomly, right? Just because it is a bitch to get into. And you're right, I'm a mess by the time I get there, whether I'm walking or whether I'm riding the bike. The only difference is I get out quicker. That's about the only upside of my mountain bike.
Yeah, if it's a downhill.
Yeah.
And so then it was like, okay, well, what do I need to do to build one of these? So I was looking at, the big names in the industry, Rambo, Baku, Quiet Cat. I was like, okay, what do I need to do to build this bike? So started researching the parts, and you can build your own. I like mid-drive bikes because they have more torque. Like that motor has twice the amount of torque as a hub motor. Hub motors don't perform very well in hills. So I wanted something where I could use it in hills. I'm not going to pedal with this thing. So the 1,000-watt motor has 160 newton meters of torque, and torque is what climbs hills, pulls weight. That's the analogy I usually give is if you've ever done any kind of carpentry and you have a cheap high-speed drill compared to the one with the handle on the side that'll spin you in a circle. Well, that's
that'll break
torque.
your wrists. Yeah.
Yeah. So those motors can climb, especially if they're geared correctly. Most of the bikes aren't geared correctly. Like the Europe, when I started looking at like different trends with bikes and stuff like that, the European market's 10 times the size of the U.S. market, and then the hunting market's an even smaller percentage of that market. So most of these bikes are designed for a larger piece of the pie to sell to more people. That's why even in the hunting industry, like step-through frames were slow to catch on, because it's technically, in Europe, it's a woman's bike. But what kind of hunter wants to have to lift their leg over the top bar with bibs on and boots? So step through frames. And then the other thing was the top end speed, where the e-bike marketplace as a whole likes to see like 28, 30 miles per hour top end speed. When I started originally building my bikes, we were one of the first company to make just single speeds, where they had one gear, they could climb anything, but they only go like 16 miles per hour because they only had the one gear. Well, if you're going through the woods or on a field edge, 16 miles per hour is fast.
That's hauling, dude. Yeah.
So we realized that people weren't really missing that top end speed. You'll miss it in some situations if you're going down the road, or you want to use it for exercise or use it with the kids and use it more as multi-purpose. But for a pure hunting rig, a single speed, no derailleur, because derailleurs were the number one thing to break. Like derailleurs are not designed to go through grass, sticks, mud. they get clogged up, they break. So getting rid of the derailleur, just making them with one gear, extra strong chains. That's kind of the direction that I went when I started the company. Now we have a couple different internally geared hubs where technology has gotten to the point where you can take all the working parts of that derailleur and put it inside the hub. So you still have just the single speed drivetrain with the chain and all the shiftings inside the hub. The one hub's actually an automatic transmission like a car, and then the other one has 14 different gears that you switch on the handlebars. So you can get, there's really 0 point in having a derailleur on a bike designed for hunting at this point, because there's other options that are way better. And my goal has always been just to make these things as bulletproof as possible. I build the bikes, I run the company, I take the customer service calls, so I don't want any customer service calls. Right. I don't want anything to break. I don't want to have any problems. So that's kind of been the direction where we're going to look at every part that breaks and we're going to make it better. And last year we had very few problems. The only thing that was failing was the rear hubs, and that rear hub is used by everybody. Like the big names I just mentioned, they use the exact same hub. There's only like 3 different options for an e-bike hub on the market, because they have 36 holes and they're fairly specific. So we actually designed our own hub last year to get rid of all the problems we're having, and now we have one that got tested. It got tested to be 3 times stronger than all the other hubs on the market. So just eliminating any possible problem, bigger chains, because the chains we use actually won't even fit through a derailleur. They're so thick. So just anything that's going to fail, how do we fix it? How do we make it different? And just make these things so, because hunters put low miles but hard miles. They beat the crap out of these things. They're not putting 1,000 miles on it, but some guy is going to go on vacation for a week and he needs this bike to perform for however many days he has on his trip. He cannot have this thing break. Right. So that's the goal, is so that I don't want to cost anybody a trip. Like, I understand how important that is, and then now using the bike, how important the bike is to my strategy. So, people have been willing to give up top end speed for performance, especially when it comes to hunting.
Heck yeah, man. I mean, I'd much rather not have issues and be reliable and know that I can get up, I'm on this trail or this access road that I'm going to climb on, that's this mountain, up the side of this mountain or this hill or whatever, right? And I'm going to make it, right? Like that, I would rather know that and do it and know that like my top end's going to be 16 miles per hour. Like, I'd much rather have that than be like, hey, you know what? I can zip around at 28, 30 miles per hour, but I'm not sure I'm going to make it up to where I'm planning to hunt today. I think anyone would take that trade-off. But the one thing I was always curious about was that, is it always chain, or are there belt options as well?
So we have a belt drive.
Which do you prefer, I guess, would be my other question.
They both have positive and negative. So like in a straight line, the belt is stronger than the chain, but the belt doesn't like to be manipulated. Like if you had a stick that's going to twist the belt, all of a sudden you're changing the parameters for the strength of that belt. And then the chain's going to have deeper engagement with the cog. Like they're going to meet deeper than the belt is more of surface content. Right. The belts have been good, especially in the fall if you're getting salt on the roads, because it's zero maintenance. Like if you can just rinse them off and they'll work perfect. And for us, a lot of it has to do with the gear ratios, because when you make a single speed, your parameters are really tight. Like depending on the size of your front cassette and your rear cog, your belt or chain has to be a perfect length for that whole system to be tight. So there's fewer options with the belt, so the gear ratios are a little bit different. So on our one single speed bike, the belt is a little bit faster, which means it doesn't climb as good, because the the slower the bike is with the one gear, the better it climbs. Like if you took your mountain bike and you put it in your climbing gear and you tried to pedal down the road, you wouldn't go very fast.
Right.
So that's your climbing gear, which is why single speeds weren't really an option early on, because like if you built a single speed bike without a motor, you'd never gear it the way I'm gearing these bikes, because you'd only be able to pedal like 6 miles an hour.
Right.
So the parts didn't exist, because you need bigger rear cogs than are on the market. So we ended up fabricating our own parts to build these single speed bikes, because with the motors, I think it's 160 rotations per minute. So you have way more RPMs than you could pedal with your feet. So you can still get 17 miles an hour compared to 6 miles an hour with just your feet, which is plenty fast. And then the gear ratios is that same gear that you'd be able to pedal 6 miles per hour. You can go up extremely steep terrain. I have videos where throttle only climbing ski hills. You know, they're Michigan. We're not in Colorado, but I mean, it's still, people are skiing down this thing, and I can drive up it with a bike without having to pedal.
Right.
So that's what guys, you know, especially like Pennsylvania, I sell a lot of bikes because you guys have steep terrain. Anywhere with steeper stuff and mountains, like I sell very few bikes in Florida, because my bikes are, what I'm selling is more expensive than, especially like hub bikes. Like you can get a really inexpensive hub motor bike. It's going to have really cheap parts. Like they're going to cut every corner along the way to come out with a bike that costs $1,500, compared to if you're putting high-end parts, stuff that's not going to break at the same rate those other parts are going to break on a bike, then, you know, the cost starts to add up. But if you're in hilly terrain, you need those parts. Otherwise, you're going to be pedaling. Either you're going to burn up the motor, or you're going to be walking up the hill. Right. So if you want to drive up the hill with only the throttle, then you know there's a cost to that when you're building the bike. Right.
The one question I had too was around like the battery life and charging, right? Because a lot of the places I'm at are somewhat remote, and I'm working off of like a solar generator and stuff like that. And so, like how many miles or how far can you get on like one charge of a battery, and like what's the battery life and that type of stuff, or what should people look for, or what should I look for, you know, in regards to that?
So I mean, for the overall marketplace, like you're going to want high quality batteries. Like if you look on Amazon and such battery is $200 and the exact same battery is $600. Well, there's a reason that battery's $200. Like it's going to have cheaper cells, cheaper welds, and overall, you know, poorer construction and potentially hazardous when you try to charge it, and hopefully it doesn't light on fire. So, so we use high quality batteries. When you look at a battery, whether it's my bike or somebody else's bike, the battery is going to have an amp hour rating, and then the motor is going to pull so many amps to operate. So range is pretty consistent. Like that's where I don't understand why some of these companies advertise these crazy ranges, but they're factoring in pedal assist, where if you want to do all the work, my bike will go 1,000 miles. But when I look at the batteries, I rate them throttle only, no pedaling, hills, mixed terrain, and usually it's 1 mile per amp hour. So we're using the biggest batteries they sell. So they're 30 amp hour equivalent batteries. So they're about a 30-mile range with no pedaling. And then there's also, you can get a solar charger for the batteries if you're in the back country. But that's a pretty far. I mean, 30 miles, especially for Midwest guys. Like when I first started selling them, a lot of it was like 15 amp hour batteries, which is plenty for even in the Midwest. But it was nice to have that cushion where you really didn't have to worry about it at all. Like there's guys who will, like I think I talked to one guy who I don't think, and he hunts fairly regular. I don't think he charges battery the entire year. Season. So I mean, they have a good range, and they're a lot of it I think has to do with the quality, because I haven't had any problems where the cold has significantly impacted the range.
Mm-hmm.
Like it'll be a little bit, but you hear some stories where it's a significant difference, and I don't know if that's just the discharge rate of some of the cheaper batteries. Because if you look at, like, we just had a really cold stretch. I'm sure you had it too. Like, if you had a high quality battery in your car, it would start, and then if somebody had a cheap battery,
probably not going to.
It wasn't starting.
Right.
So, I mean, it's the same. It's the same thing, but it's just different levels of quality.
Yeah. Because I'm just thinking, like, as far as, battery life goes, or range rather. I guess range is what you would think of in terms of like driving it and pulling down the battery. I would think that I would probably use more battery in the off season when I'm scouting and when I'm putting out trail cameras and stuff like that, because I'm hitting multiple spots, like, you know what I mean, where it's like I'm biking to this spot, ditching the bike, and I'm walking however far to get to like the tree that I'm, if I can't drive up to it or whatever, and I'm getting to wherever my camera's at, and then I'm coming back, jumping on the bike, going to the next spot, right? It's like I might do, just say 8 miles, right? Like in that stretch to kind of check cameras and scout and stuff like that. Where when I'm hunting, it's like, most of the spots, that I could drive any distance to would be probably no more than 2 miles on like access roads and stuff like that to get to where I can jump in to get to, where I'm going to hunt or whatever. Right. Because most of the spots, like I can't drive right up to it. It's like I would have to ditch and like walk like part of it. But some of the hikes that I have are like, mile and a half, 2 miles, whatever it is that you could bike, and so I would think during the season I would actually probably use less. I would have less of a range need than I would even than in the off season, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean 30 miles is a lot of
I can't imagine.
driving.
Yeah, I ain't using that. Like I'll be good for like a whole trip with 30 miles. You know what I mean? For sure.
I don't think I have any customers, like people ask about buying a spare battery. I'm like, one, they're expensive, and two, it's not good just for them to sit. Like you're better off just using the one you have. Mm-hmm. And I haven't had anybody who's needed the range of a second battery in most situations. Like,
man, if someone needs the range of a second battery, they're doing more riding than hunting, I think.
That's a lot of driving, but
right. Nice. It could be handy though out somewhere like in the plain states where you just drive in glass. You zip around. I could see maybe using like a lot of battery out there potentially.
You could. Still 30 miles is a lot. We'll see. Yeah. I gotta find somebody who runs into that problem and see what the heck they're doing.
I'd have to have a very comfortable seat if I was going to do 30 miles. I'm just saying, in one stretch. I don't know if this body, what I've put it through, could handle that.
Yeah. We put we don't put Tour de France seats on our bike, so you'll have a nice, comfortable beach cruiser seat. So.
Nice. There you go. So maybe I could then. Yeah, because the only seats I've ever had were the not so great ones that from like the
no fun.
Yeah, where you get off sore. So what? So let's say at the end of the season, like what as far as storing it. Let's say if I'm not going to use it in the winter, I'm going to like just store it until spring, until I get out to start doing scouting and stuff like that. Like, what do you recommend for storing it and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's not much that you have to do to them, really. I mean, a lot of the parts are just standard bike parts. Mm-hmm. With the battery, if you're going to store the battery for an extended period of time, they recommend 80%. So you could charge it all the way up, take it for a little ride, and then you'll be good to store that in like a dry, just
in your garage
normal
or whatever
temperature spot. Yeah. You don't want them they can handle cold weather. You don't want it to freeze, especially if they're fully drained and they freeze. That's going to be bad for them.
Right.
And then you never know if you're going to have, water caught in some part of the bike that might expand if it freezes. So
right.
Like I have a bike behind me. I mean, I'll usually either put them in my garage with might freeze or have some inside, but I mean they're built to handle a lot. I mean, I was talking to a guy on the phone today, and he had a whatever bike, and it shorted out because it was left out in the rain, and he called the company, and they're like, well, you're not supposed to leave it in the rain. And he's like, well, what the hell?
Right.
I says, I'm using it for hunting. And my point to him was, if your bike breaks because it's in the rain, it's my fault, not yours. Like,
right.
I have to understand what my customers expect and what they're going to do to these bikes, and build them to withstand what they're going to throw at them.
Nice. Yeah, man. I think I'm on the e-bike train, dude. I think that's where I'm at. I just feel like it would bring a level of efficiency to, scouting, trail camera checking, like pretty much all of it, hunting, especially in some of the areas that I have, some of the hikes that I've had in the past couple of years. It would make a big difference. And so, I wanted to ask you this earlier, and I just kind of forgot until now. How many different versions of bikes do you make, and what do you kind of recommend, for people? Are there different bikes that people should consider depending on the application that they have or type of hunting that they're doing, or, for the different SKUs that you have?
So all our bikes, and going back to how I don't want customer service calls, and I want to exceed expectations. Like, I don't want to tell somebody the range of this bike is 100 miles and then it's 30 and they're like, well, what the hell? Right. I don't want to tell them it's going to climb this and then it can't. So all of our bikes hit a minimum performance standard. So our most affordable bike will perform right next to our most expensive bike. Our most expensive bike is probably going to have a bigger battery, more features, and more expensive parts. So like an example would be like a Chevy Tahoe and an Escalade. It's the exact same car, but one has more bells and whistles. Those bells and whistles might be important to one person, might not be important to another. So we have our bikes start out with the Bow Hunter, which is kind of the original bike that I started selling. And that's basically, it's more of a white label bike where I was taking an existing bikes, taking it apart, putting better parts on it, making it a single speed. And that was kind of the bike that launched our company. And then after selling enough of those and thinking, what would I change? What would I make better? We completely redesigned and made our own frames. So that's the Hunter, which is a step through. The first bike had a top bar. The Hunter is the first jump up, which is the first significant jump because you get a step through frame. The chain tensioner, we talked about how that chain has to keep tight. Well, the chain's going to stretch over time. So the two ways to get rid of that is either you have a chain tensioner, which doesn't hang down like a derailleur does, but it hangs down a little bit to put tension on that chain. So we got rid of the chain tensioner and put the adjustment right into the frame where the rear axle slides back to keep everything tight. Step through frame, bigger batteries, front basket, which everybody wanted a front basket. We've actually added a bow holder to the front basket. So that bike has all these other features. All the trailer attachments are integrated into the frame compared to you'd have to attach the trailer to like your axle on the Bow Hunter, and then the Hunter, it's all onto the frame. We have the rack specifically designed to accept the high attachment point trailers. The next jump up is the switchback bikes, and those are step throughs too. A lot of similarities with the Hunter, a couple more bells and whistles, and then our most expensive bike, we partnered with Lone Wolf Custom Gear, and the switchback actually kind of came out of that partnership where Andre talked to me about, hey, would you be interested in doing a Lone Wolf bike? And I was like, geez, it was overwhelming because I was like, I don't know, geez, I need to have a bike that represents that name. Like, I can't just have a piece of junk with a Lone Wolf sticker on it. So originally I wasn't sure about it, and then some things happened where a part I didn't think I'd have access to came to be that automatic transmission hub. So I was like, this could be the Lone Wolf bike. Like, this is brand new technology. Nobody has it. The only other company that sells this part on a bike is Quiet Cat. So little old me and Quiet Cat are the only two companies that sell this part. So I was like, that could be that makes sense to have something, a significant launch. That could be the Lone Wolf bike. We ended up doing a couple different versions with them. Andre designed the rear rack where all their stands lock in. So there's a lot of features, especially if you're running custom gear stuff. But a lot of Andre's ideas have transitioned into the other bike lineups too, because he's working with him. He's very particular about, why do we do this and how can we do it better type thought processes. So like simple things like the handlebars, where the standard handlebar on the market is 30 inches wide. So he wanted narrower, so all of our bikes now have 25 inch, which is way better for going through cornrows, going through trees, going through different things, compared to the rest of the industry is still in that European
regular
model
bike.
where you need wide handlebars so you can steer.
Right.
It's like, well, I'm hunting, I'm going through trees, like even to like I can take my 25 inch wide handlebars and like run through a doorway. If you try with those 30s, you're hitting something. So it's just like stupid stuff like that
it's just the details of things that seem that don't seem important until they become important. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things. Yeah. That's cool, man. That's awesome, dude. Yeah. I think I'm on the e-bike train, and I don't know if you can talk about any of it, but there's other cool stuff that's coming this year, I guess we could say, and we could maybe just leave it at that, unless there's more you can share.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. We could probably share that.
Okay.
So we're gonna have Osseo wrapped bikes. It's actually it's a hydro dip, so it's like basically a paint dip or whatever. I talked with Joe last year, kind of got the green light for it. It took a bit. That camo pattern, like it's way more complicated than you think. Like when you think about because it's not brown, it's not gray, it's not, it's like there's a lot. Like when you actually look at it, like there's a lot going into it. So it took longer to get it figured out because, like that's his baby, like that's his camo pattern. It can't look.
It can't not look like it's supposed to look, yeah.
It can't look brown. It can't look gray. It's got to look, it's like, I can't say I'm sick of looking at the pattern, but I finally got it figured out. But because it has gray, it has brown, and then it has like a cream undertone to it. There's a lot going on there, and we got it figured out. We'll have the bikes in that color pattern, and we'll have those pretty quick now, so...
It's awesome.
We'll be getting those out to people, and excited about that, especially get that opportunity to work with another. You obviously work with them, and he's great guy and amazing company, and ran their clothes for the last 2 years, and the clothes are awesome. And anybody who's thinking about it, buying new camo, the one thing for me is you can't beat the lifetime guarantee. Yeah. Like if you go over a barbed wire fence and rip them and they'll fix them. Like, I don't think there's another company like that.
Well, I think that's the important thing. Like when we think about, hunters and, options to buy different products and stuff like that, I think it's important we think about who we're supporting, right? And try to, for me at least, it's like I try to support the best I can, like guys that I know, guys that, that even if they don't work with me on the podcast, I try to support folks that, if I don't work with somebody, it's like there's a friend of mine, right? And I'd rather support those folks because they support some folks that I know in the hunting space or whatever the case is, right? And just, people who stand behind their work, I think more importantly, especially when you get into, more high-end pieces of gear, whether we're talking e-bikes or we're talking about spending money on camo or spending money on, saddles or tree stands or whatever it happens to be, making sure that the people that you're, buying from stand behind their stuff is, number one. Right. So yeah, man. Awesome, buddy. Well, I appreciate you coming on, dude. I know I've kept you here about an hour and a half. I think I'm on the e-bike train now, and I'm looking forward to seeing those Osseo gear bikes. I might see one. I know you're going to be at the Harrisburg Outdoor Show. So make mention of that. I don't know what booth number you're at. Do you know what booth you're at?
I'll be in the Lone Wolf booth. I'll have a Lone Wolf bike. Anybody who's interested, that'll give you a good idea on sizing, even if you don't want the Lone Wolf bike, just for what'll fit your needs. I'll be there. The bike will be there the whole time. I'll be there personally the first 4 days. I'm going to try to feel it out, see what those shows are kind of weird for me. Like when you're selling something in that price range, like it's like how many people are walking around with that in their pocket, but I guess we'll find out. So get the word out.
Awesome, man. Yeah, so people stop by the archery hall, stop by and see the Lone Wolf bike, Face Off bike, Ebikes. Give everyone your website and any of the social media kind of presence that you have that people could check stuff out on.
Yeah, so the website is www.faceoffebikes.com, and then we built the name, and I try to post a lot on Facebook. So follow our Facebook page, Face Off E-Bikes. We get a lot of information, sales information, like basic e-bike tips. So follow that page, and then have an Instagram page too. But Facebook's kind of where I think probably concentrate a lot of our efforts with like sale notifications and different things. And feel free to message me or call me. Like I talk to probably 99% of the people who buy a bike. It's a big purchase. You want to make sure you're getting what you want. And I like to talk to everybody to make sure that they're getting what's going to fit their needs, rather than just going to the website and then getting something and kind of thinking, oh, I should have done this or done that. It's pretty easy for me to kind of
walk a person through it.
And walk somebody through it and get them exactly what they need.
Cool. Awesome, buddy. Well, I appreciate you coming on, man. Good dude. I love talking to you, dude. I look forward to talking to you more in the future. We're going to have to get you back on. Maybe one of these days we'll see each other in person. Heck, maybe we'll even do a hunt in one of those big woods pieces together or something.
Sounds good. Look forward to it.
All right, buddy. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you do that for me. And before I shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Osseo Gear, Tethered, and Lathrop & Sons Boot Company. And until next time, we'll see y'all.